An aggressive gorilla ran toward the fence. Who was standing there changed everything. The first thing anyone noticed was not the sound, but the absence of it. Moments before, the enclosure had been alive with the low murmurs of visitors, the distant laughter of children, and the rhythmic rustle of leaves swaying under the late afternoon breeze. But then, like a breath held too long, the world seemed to pause. The air grew thick, almost metallic, carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and aged bark. And then he moved. The massive silverback gorilla burst forward from the shadows of his enclosure with a force that felt less like motion and more like an eruption. His knuckles struck the ground with a heavy, resonating thud, each step vibrating through the concrete pathways beyond the barrier. His dark fur shimmered under fractured sunlight, streaks of silver along his back glowing like embers. His eyes, deep, intelligent, and burning with something no one could immediately understand, were locked onto one point: the fence. Visitors stumbled backward. A woman gasped sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Somewhere, a child began to cry. The metallic barrier rattled violently as the gorilla charged toward it, his powerful frame colliding with the steel mesh in a thunderous crash that echoed through the enclosure. But it wasn't the aggression that froze everyone in place. It was what stood on the other side. Because the person he was charging toward wasn't running. Before we go any further, take a moment with us. If this story pulls you in, even in these first few seconds, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. These stories travel across the world, and somehow they always find the hearts that need them most. The zoo had always been known for its calm. Tucked away on the edge of a dense, sprawling reserve, the place carried a kind of quiet dignity. Tall trees formed a natural canopy overhead, filtering sunlight into soft, golden fragments that danced across winding paths. The air smelled of wet leaves, fresh hay, and the faint sweetness of overripe fruit. Even on busy days, there was a sense of order, an unspoken agreement between humans and animals that this space was shared, but respected. At the center of it all was the gorilla enclosure, a wide, carefully designed habitat meant to replicate the dense forests of Central Africa. It was filled with climbing structures, thick ropes, and patches of lush greenery. But the true heart of the enclosure was him. His name was Atlas. At 16 years old, Atlas was in the prime of his life, a dominant silverback, powerful and commanding, yet known among the staff for his unusually calm demeanor. He wasn't the kind of gorilla who displayed aggression without reason. In fact, many described him as thoughtful, observant, almost introspective. There had always been something different about him, and no one knew that better than her. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. Sarah had been working at the reserve for nearly a decade. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was someone who understood the language of presence, the quiet signals, the shifts in energy that couldn't be measured or explained in textbooks. From the beginning, there had been a connection between her and Atlas. It wasn't immediate. Trust, with animals like him, never is. It had been built slowly, through routine, consistency, and a kind of patience that most people never learn. She would sit near the enclosure during feeding times, her voice soft and steady, even when she wasn't speaking directly to him. Over months, then years, Atlas began to respond, not with tricks, not with obedience, but with awareness. He would sit closer when she was near, watch her movements with a calm, steady gaze. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, when the mist still clung to the ground and the world felt untouched, he would mirror her stillness, two beings separated by a barrier, yet somehow sharing the same rhythm of breath. It was never spoken about openly, but everyone saw it. And then, something changed. It started subtly. Atlas began withdrawing from the rest of the group. His appetite decreased. The playful interactions that once defined his mornings faded into long stretches of stillness. He would sit alone, his massive frame hunched slightly, his gaze distant. The keepers noticed first. Then the veterinarians. Clinical observations were made, notes were taken, blood samples collected. There was no immediate sign of injury, no visible illness that could explain the shift. But something was wrong. The air around the enclosure began to feel heavier. Even visitors sensed it, though they couldn't name it. The usual energy, the quiet vibrancy of a thriving habitat, was replaced by something more subdued, more uncertain. Sarah felt it most of all. She adjusted her routine, spending more time near him. Speaking softly, offering his favorite fruits, ripe bananas, slices of melon, the sharp, sweet scent of mango filling the air as she placed them carefully near the feeding area. Sometimes he would take them, sometimes he wouldn't. And then came the day everything broke. The sky had been overcast, thick clouds pressing low against the horizon, carrying the heavy promise of rain. The air was humid, clinging to the skin, making every breath feel dense and slow. Visitors were fewer that day, the kind of quiet that settles before a storm. Sarah had just arrived at the enclosure when she noticed the tension. Atlas wasn't sitting, he was pacing, back and forth, back and forth. His movements were sharper than usual, his breathing heavier. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble with each step. The other gorillas kept their distance, instinctively sensing something they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Then, suddenly, he stopped, his head lifted, and his eyes locked onto her. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but felt like something far longer. He charged. The force of his movement sent a shockwave through the enclosure. Leaves scattered, dust rose into the air, carrying with it the dry, bitter scent of disturbed earth. His roar, deep, guttural, and raw, cut through the silence like a fracture. People screamed. But Sarah didn't move, not because she wasn't afraid, but because something, deep within her, told her this wasn't what it looked like. The impact against the fence was violent. Metal rattled, the sound echoing like thunder. Atlas's massive hands gripped the barrier, his chest heaving, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. Up close, she could see it. Not anger, not aggression, something else, something breaking. His eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, weren't focused on dominance or threat. They were searching, desperate, almost pleading. And then she saw it, a subtle shift in the way he held his arm. The slight tremor, the unnatural angle, everything clicked into place. This wasn't a display, it was a signal. The veterinarians were called immediately. The area was cleared, the tension thick as rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, each drop tapping against metal, leaves, and skin with a steady, grounding rhythm. Sedation was risky, but necessary. Hours passed in a blur of urgency. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, sharp and clinical, cutting through the earthy tones of the enclosure. Under careful examination, the truth revealed itself. A deep internal injury, likely sustained days earlier, hidden, silent, but worsening. Atlas hadn't been withdrawing out of instinct, he had been enduring. And when the pain became too much, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He reached out. The surgery was long, delicate, every movement precise, Every decision weighed against the fragile balance between intervention and survival. Outside, the storm passed. The air cooled. The scent of rain lingered, fresh and clean, washing away the tension that had settled over the reserve. And then he breathed, slow, steady, alive. Recovery was not immediate. Healing never is. But the first moment that mattered came quietly. Days later, as the golden light of early morning filtered through the trees, Sarah returned to the enclosure. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp grass and distant blossoms. Atlas was awake, weak but aware. She sat where she always had, just beyond the barrier. No sudden movements, no words at first, just presence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he moved closer, slowly, carefully. Each step measured, until he was there, close enough that she could see the rise and fall of his chest, hear the soft rhythm of his breath. And then something extraordinary. They synchronized, breath for breath, inhale, exhale. Two beings, separated by steel, yet connected by something far deeper. The tension that had once filled the space dissolved, replaced by a quiet, profound understanding. He hadn't been aggressive. He had been asking for help, and she had listened. There are things we are only beginning to understand about animals like Atlas, their intelligence, their emotional depth, their ability to perceive and respond to the world in ways that go far beyond instinct. But perhaps the most powerful lesson isn't in what they know, it's in what they feel. Because in that moment, when pain became unbearable, when silence was no longer enough, Atlas didn't retreat. He reached out, not with words, not with logic, but with something far more universal, trust. And maybe that's the sixth sense we so often overlook. Not something mystical, but something deeply, profoundly real. The ability to feel beyond ourselves, to recognize need, to respond with presence. Before this story fades, take a moment to carry it with you. If it moved you, even in the smallest way, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in the quiet intelligence of animals. And tell us this. Have you ever felt that unspoken connection with an animal? Something that couldn't be explained, but was undeniably real? Because sometimes the most powerful conversations are the ones that never use words at all.